3 years ago, I led a photography trip to Iceland. This is a selection of the stuff that I took with me. 2 digital camera bodies, a film camera, spare batteries, a myriad of lenses, a drone, a tripod. Fast forward to earlier this year when I led a weekend photography workshop on Anglesey in North Wales. This time, all I took with me was a digital camera, a fixed focal length lens and a spare battery. And you know what? I didn't even use the spare battery. I'll never get over this overpacking lark. As photographers, we're constantly bombarded by new and better gear. The more bases we have covered with lenses and equipment, the better our photography will be. The more knowledge we have, the easier photography will become. But what if it's actually the opposite of that? Over the last few years, I've realised that actually the less stuff we fill our kit bags with, the less junk that we fill our minds with, the more honed our photography can become. So in this video, I want to share with you a few different ways in which you can limit yourself in order to progress your photography journey. And it'll also give me a chance to share a few of my photographs that I took on my weekend workshop in Wales. The weekend started on a gloriously sunny note, although the problem was there was not very much detail in the sky and the foreground was quite boring. So what I decided to do was try and limit myself to some panoramic crop photographs. These got rid of the boring sky and also the boring foreground and helped to lead your eye to the width and scale of the beautiful landscape and also the details within it. As you can see here, getting rid of all of that distracting stuff that goes on in the background. Oh, there's somebody playing on the beach over there, I'm going to need my telephoto lens. Oh, there's an interesting landscape there, I'm going to need my wide angle lens. By honing your attention to just one type or style of photography, you can start to notice a lot more things within that niche, rather than trying to notice absolutely everything. Having said all that, I think this is actually one of my favourite shots from the whole trip, and it's obviously not a letterbox crop. But I think it took that process of looking for that narrow landscape to help me to realise that actually this one, the foreground is a bit more interesting and the undulations of the landscape fill the frame. So therefore, I can go for the standard crop instead. On the second day of the weekend workshop, there was a bit more of an industrial theme going on as we headed to some old copper mines and then an abandoned brickworks in a quiet cove. Because there was a theme to the day, it allowed me to limit myself to the subject matter that I was photographing. Instead of going for the wide open vistas that I'd done on the day before, I decided to train my eye more on the structures, details and textures within the industrial landscape. The more I followed this track, the more I found the theme of rusty colours developing in the photographs that I was taking, which also led me further to explore this idea. The more we limit ourselves to a subject matter, a concept, or maybe even a single colour scheme in our pictures, the more we can start to notice and observe the things that interest us and draw our eye. It made me realise that limitations don't have to just be around subjects, themes or concepts. They can also be around the location where we're shooting, or even the conditions on any given day. Because what we were photographing on day 2 was distinctly different to what we were photographing on day 1, it allowed me to make that mental change of thinking, yesterday I was following this approach and today I'm following this approach. By doing this and limiting ourselves to single types of photography on different days, not only does it help us to discover more genres of photography, but it also helps us to get under the skin of those different types of photography, rather than having to notice everything at once. On the evening of the second day, we were greeted with a fantastic sunset at South Stack Lighthouse. I started off by continuing to follow those shapes and structures that I was doing earlier in the day, but then shifted my attention once again as the sun started to go down. Back in landscape photography mode, my eye was being drawn back to the colours and the simple shapes of the landscape. As the light dropped, a few members of our group were using tripods to set up for capturing those beautiful low light sunset shots, but I decided to take a different approach. As many of you all know, I'm not a huge fan of the tripod, ironically because of their limitations. Not only are they cumbersome to set up, they often restrict us to the vantage point that we can photograph from. So at South Stag, instead of limiting myself to a specific set vantage point, I decided to limit myself in terms of the equipment that I was carrying around. So I ditched the tripod in favour of a bit more dynamic movement across the cliff top. As the sun rapidly set behind the horizon, I was looking for different vantage points of ways in which I could make it a little bit more interesting. Having more freedom of movement allowed me to capture things like the sun directly behind the lighthouse and some beautiful flowers on the cliff top in the foreground as the golden hour light illuminated the seascape beyond. It goes to show that sometimes we have to choose between different limitations. As with everything in photography, there's not a right way and a wrong way, so we have to go with what we feel is right for us. Of course, the tripod wasn't the only piece of equipment that I left behind. Throughout the whole weekend, I was just using one camera and a fixed focal length. On the third and final day of our weekend, we really did mix up the different types of photography and locations that we visited, starting off at a bustling little seaside village and finishing off at another lighthouse. You would think visiting all of these different types of locations, not just in that one day, but in the previous 2 days as well, you would need a plethora of lenses to cover every eventuality of what you might find. But having used my one camera with its fixed focal length for the last 3 days, I suddenly realised that not once had I thought, I could probably do with a different focal length here, or a different camera would do a better job. Of course you can get away with things like cropping and choosing different angles to photograph from, but ultimately, by using single fixed focal lengths and just one camera, really brings out the versatility of what we can achieve with very little equipment. Because I wasn't zooming in and out all the time, I was wandering around more, potentially observing more from different angles, and also increasing perspective by getting physically closer rather than zooming into it. After a weekend of limiting myself across different aspects of photography, it made me come to a very interesting conclusion. I think the more gear we fill our bags with, the more stuff that we fill our heads with, the more confusing photography becomes. But ultimately, photography is just about one thing, and that is what we observe and how we translate what we observe through our photographs. And we don't need all of that paraphernalia to do that.